We like to believe we are the masters of our own fate. But in reality, many of us spend our lives running in circles, trying to heal wounds inflicted by those who raised us. We chase empty status and choose the wrong partners, all in a desperate search for the validation we lacked as children. Grace Kelly conquered the world, becoming a princess and a global icon. But behind every triumph was a little girl trying to prove to her father that she was finally worthy of his love. Grace Kelly, Princess of Monaco, a woman whose name is shorthand for perfection. But behind that porcelain mask lay more than just talent. There was a deep, aching void. Her life is a profound example of how a cold upbringing can become the blueprint for a lifetime. In the Kelly household, where worth was measured in Olympic gold and business empires, Grace often felt like an outsider. Her father, Jack Kelly, valued grit and dominance above all else, and his quiet, sensitive daughter simply didn't fit his definition of a winner. This hunger for the recognition she never received at home became both her greatest engine and her eventual curse. She sought approval in the eyes of powerful men and at the summit of Hollywood, all to silence the inner voice whispering, "It's still not enough." Today, we aren't just looking at a star's biography, we are exploring the human search for warmth in a cold world. We will see how a lack of paternal affection crafted the Ice Queen persona, and why even a royal crown couldn't heal a heart that felt perpetually overlooked. This is the story of how the 20th century's greatest fairy tale was in truth an attempt to escape the shadows of her own childhood.
To understand the woman Grace Kelly would become, we have to travel back to Philadelphia in the 1930s. Imagine a grand, prestigious mansion on Henry Avenue, the ultimate monument to the Kelly family's success. This wasn't a story of rags to riches or struggle. On the contrary, Grace grew up in an environment of absolute abundance. But behind the flawless brick facade of that house lay a brutal philosophy. The patriarch of the family, Jack Kelly, was a living legend, a three-time Olympic gold medalist in rowing and a self-made millionaire. He built his life on a foundation of iron discipline and achievement. In his world, there was a clear line in the sand. You were either a winner or a nobody. He raised his children with that same cutthroat spirit, turning their daily lives into a never-ending marathon for the title of the best. Grace was the third child, and compared to her athletic, strong-willed siblings, she felt like an outlier. Quiet, bookish, and prone to daydreaming, she lived in the shadow of her older sister, Peggy, who was the undisputed apple of her father's eye. In the Kelly household, physical grit and sports were the only currencies that mattered. Grace, with her delicate health and reserved nature, was long dismissed by her parents as the weak link. It wasn't overt cruelty, it was something more subtle, a constant, quiet dismissal of who she actually was. While other kids were just being kids, Grace was learning how to live up to the high-stakes Kelly brand. Keep your chin up, your back straight, your voice soft but steady, and never ever let them see you sweat. It was here, in the echoing halls of that Philadelphia estate, that she began to craft the Ice Queen persona that would later become her global trademark. Her mother, Margaret, a former model and physical education instructor, was the enforcer of etiquette and decorum. In their world, showing emotion was a sign of weakness. Self-control was everything. Grace learned early on that a polished exterior was her best defense against criticism. She mastered the mask of the perfect daughter, a mask that hid a sharp intellect and a growing hunger for more. Even though her father scoffed at her interest in the arts, dismissed it as a frivolous hobby, Grace didn't blink. For her, acting wasn't just about self-expression. It was a way to build a world where she set the rules, rather than living by someone else's. At 18, Grace made the decision that would change the course of her life. She moved to New York City to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. To her conservative social circle, this was a scandalous, even defiant move. Her father didn't fully approve, but he let her go, convinced she'd come crawling back home the moment things got tough. He drastically underestimated her backbone. Grace didn't leave for New York to fail. In her suitcase, she carried more than just her debutante dresses. She carried a cold, calculated list of goals. She arrived in the city with one clear objective: to prove to the world, and more importantly to her family, that the quiet girl in glasses could conquer heights her athletic relatives couldn't even imagine. New York was a different kind of playing field, one where the winning hand wasn't won with physical strength, but with charm, poise, and the tactical choice of the right allies. Moving to New York was the point of no return for Grace. Leaving her parents' suffocating oversight behind, she moved into the Barbizon Hotel for Women, a legendary establishment deemed respectable for daughters of high society, but one that simmered with raw, youthful ambition. At the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Grace quickly realized that talent and good posture were just the entry fee. She was surrounded by hundreds of girls just as beautiful and driven as she was. But Grace had an ace up her sleeve, the ice princess persona she had perfected in Philadelphia. While her classmates tried to grab attention by being loud and eccentric, Grace played a longer game. She cultivated an aura of untouchable elegance that acted like a magnet for powerful men. It was during this time that she entered her first serious relationship, setting a pattern that would define the rest of her life. She fell for Don Richardson, one of her instructors at the academy. He was older, more experienced, and, most importantly, everything her family loathed. This romance was Grace's first real act of defiance against her father. When she brought Don home for a weekend, the result was an explosion. After finding the teacher's personal belongings in his daughter's room, Jack Kelly flew into a legendary rage. For Grace, it was a moment of clarity. She saw that her personal choices could actually shake her invincible father's authority. Instead of backing down, she became intoxicated by the power of her own charm. She realized that a man with status or authority, whether a mentor or a master of his craft, could give her the sense of importance she had always been denied at the family dinner table. To maintain some financial independence from her parents, Grace began working as a model. Her face started appearing on magazine covers and in advertisements, but her sights were set much higher. She understood that her beauty was a tool and her network was her leverage. Influential figures in television and theater began to take notice. Grace walked a razor-thin line. To the public, she was the diligent student from a good family, but behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate about the young woman who knew exactly how to pick her protectors. She wasn't just networking, she was collecting the attention of men who could open the right doors. It wasn't pure, cynical calculation. It was an instinctive search for the protection and validation she never felt at home. By graduation, the timid girl from Philadelphia was gone. Grace had learned to weaponize her restraint, using her cool exterior as bait. Her manners were flawless, her voice melodic and self-assured. She knew Hollywood was hunting for new faces, and she was ready to offer them something unique, the image of a high-bred lady with a hidden fire. Yet beneath the confidence lived that same old hunger for unconditional approval. Every new success, every heart she conquered was just a temporary fix for the pain. Ahead of her lay the blinding lights of the major studios and encounters with the era's biggest titans, where her habit of choosing the wrong men would evolve from a private secret into the scandalous headlines she would eventually have to hide behind the glitter of a royal crown. The move to Hollywood was Grace's entry into the big leagues, where the stakes were immeasurably higher and the public's gaze was unforgiving. She didn't arrive as just another starlet. She stepped onto the scene as a polished aristocrat whose cool brilliance immediately caught the eyes of legendary directors and A-list leading men. Her first real trial by fire was the filming of the western High Noon. On that dusty set, Grace first deployed her tactical charm on a living legend, Gary Cooper. Cooper was 30 years her senior, married and an untouchable icon of American cinema. But to Grace, his age and marital status weren't obstacles, they were proof of his value as a trophy. Their on-set affair was quiet, yet so obvious to the crew that rumors began to leak through the ironclad defenses of the studio publicists. In Cooper, Grace didn't just see a co-star, she saw a projection of the same masculine power and authority she had spent her life trying to win from her father. Soon, her career hit a second, more powerful gear. She became Alfred Hitchcock's muse. The master of suspense was captivated by her outward composure, famously remarking that beneath her surface lived a volcano. But while Hitchcock was busy crafting her on-screen persona as the Ice Maiden, Grace continued to seek warmth in the real world, usually with the most inappropriate candidates. The filming of Dial M for Murder sparked one of the loudest and most dangerous scandals of her life. Her co-star was Ray Milland, a quintessential family man and a public favorite. Their connection went beyond a professional relationship. Milland was so blinded by Grace that he actually began discussing a divorce from his wife of 20 years. This was the moment the mask of the proper lady first showed a serious crack. Hollywood wives began to view her as a clear and present danger, and the press started painting her as a woman for whom marriage vows meant nothing. Grace was walking a razor's edge, balancing the title of the world's most elegant actress with the growing reputation of a homewrecker. After the Milland incident came another high-stakes conquest. On the set of Mugambo, she fell for Clark Gable. Again, there was a massive age gap, again he was a married man, and again the same psychological pattern emerged. Grace sought protection and validation from those at the very top of the Hollywood Olympus. It was as if she were testing her power over the world, forcing the town's most loyal husbands to forget their commitments. Yet the paradox was this: the moment a man was ready to blow up his life for her, Grace would lose interest. She didn't want a domestic life. She wanted the high of being chosen by the best of the best. It was a never-ending chase for the ghost of her father's approval, played out on the world's biggest sound stages. Despite the growing whispers behind closed doors, her career was unstoppable. The pinnacle was her Oscar win for The Country Girl. On paper, she had won. She was officially the best actress in the world. But on the night of her greatest triumph, Grace felt a hollow, stabbing emptiness. She called her father, hoping to finally hear the words she had chased through every scandal and every affair. His reaction was characteristically dry and cold. Hollywood had given her fame and the power to take any man she wanted, but it had failed to give her the one thing she craved, the feeling that she was finally good enough. By the mid-50s, Grace's reputation was a ticking bomb. She needed a radical exit strategy. She didn't just need to clear her name, she needed to do something so grand, so spectacular, that no one would ever dare mention her Hollywood sins again. Fate handed her that chance in the form of a tiny principality on the shores of the Mediterranean. By the mid-1950s, Grace Kelly was living a paradox. She was the most sought-after actress on the planet, but her personal reputation was hanging by a thread. Behind her back, the whispers were getting louder. The wives of powerful producers and actors had begun openly labeling her a predator in pearls. Grace knew that one more high-profile scandal with a married man could tank her career as quickly as it had begun. She needed a sanctuary, the ultimate cover story that would make the world forget her past and cement her status forever. That sanctuary appeared in the spring of 1955 during the Cannes Film Festival, when she was invited to a photo shoot at the Royal Palace of Monaco. Her meeting with Prince Rainier III looked like a scene from a romance movie, but behind the scenes, it was a moment of cold, tactical calculation for both parties. Prince Rainier was in a desperate spot. His tiny principality was struggling financially, and according to old treaties with France, if the monarch failed to produce an heir, Monaco would lose its independence. He didn't just need a wife, he needed a global superstar who could bring in investment, tourism, and prestige. Grace, meanwhile, saw the union as the ultimate rebrand. It was her chance to transform from a Hollywood actress with a checkered past into a literal princess whose dignity would be protected by royal protocol. It was the deal of the century. When Rainier traveled to America that Christmas to officially ask for her hand, the Kelly family was ecstatic. Finally, Grace had done something that didn't just earn a nod from her father, it made Jack Kelly genuinely proud. She was joining a European dynasty, leaving her athletic siblings in the dust. But the initiation fee for this exclusive club was staggering. To become princess, Grace had to undergo a humiliating physical examination to prove she could bear an heir, and she had to provide a dowry of $2 million, a massive sum that her father, despite his wealth, handed over with extreme reluctance. But the heaviest blow was the total ban on her career. Rainier was firm. A prince's wife does not appear on screen, pretend to love other men for the cameras, or work for the public. Grace had to walk away from everything she had built with her own talent and commit to a role where the script was written by centuries of tradition, not by her. On her wedding day, dubbed the wedding of the century by the press, she looked breathtaking in vintage lace, but those close to her noticed a haunting emptiness in her eyes. She was stepping into a golden cage, and she knew there was no way out. Life in Monaco was a far cry from the fairy tales sold on postcards. The palace was cold and drafty, the courtiers looked down their noses at the American, and her husband proved to be short-tempered and consumed by state affairs. Grace tried to lose herself in charity work and motherhood, but her restless spirit began to wither in the silence of the palace halls. When Alfred Hitchcock approached her to star in Marnie, Grace was initially thrilled. It was a lifeline, a chance to feel alive again, to be back in the spotlight. But when the people of Monaco and the princely council expressed outrage at the idea of their princess playing a thief on screen, Rainier shut it down. On that day, Grace Kelly the actress ceased to exist. She was left alone with her title, realizing that her collection of powerful men had ended with one single man who owned her like the most expensive exhibit in his private museum. The years in Monaco transformed Grace from a Hollywood predator into a global symbol of flawless grace, but behind the closed doors of the Grimaldi Palace, a quiet drama of erosion was unfolding. The role of princess, which had once seemed like the perfect refuge from the scandals of her past, began to feel like a corset cinched too tight, breathless and suffocating. She could no longer afford a single impulsive act or an accidental glance. Her life was a rigid schedule of galas, charity dinners, and endless, empty smiles for the paparazzi. Grace Kelly, the woman who once held the hearts of Hollywood's titans in her hands, was now battling depression and a profound, hollow loneliness. Her husband, Prince Rainier, grew increasingly distant, and their marriage devolved into a series of official protocols where passion had long since been replaced by duty. In search of solace, Grace threw herself into motherhood, but even there, she found only more struggle. Her children grew up in a world of absolute privilege, yet under a crushing weight of expectation. Her relationships with her daughters, Caroline and Stephanie, were notoriously strained. The girls rebelled against the Saint Grace image their mother had so meticulously crafted over decades. In their defiance, Grace saw a mirror of her own youth, that same spark she had been forced to extinguish for the sake of a crown. To numb the void, she retreated into herself, spending her hours pressing flowers and making collages, a quiet, meditative hobby that was safe for a princess, but light years away from the blinding spotlights she secretly craved. The tragic finale came on a September morning in 1982. Grace, who almost always used a chauffeur, decided to get behind the wheel herself. Her youngest daughter, Stephanie, was in the passenger seat. They drove along the winding mountain hairpins, the very same roads where Grace had once filmed scenes for To Catch a Thief. In a split second, the car lost control, careened off a cliff, and plunged 100 feet into the ravine. The official report cited a sudden stroke that caused her to lose control of the vehicle.
However, the world was instantly flooded with rumors. Some whispered that a teenage Stephanie had actually been driving. Others suggested that Grace had simply stopped fighting. Her death at the age of 52 was the final brutal stop in her lifelong attempt to be perfect. Her funeral was a global event. Hollywood royalty and European monarchs gathered to say goodbye to the woman who had managed to bridge two incompatible worlds. But the bitterest moment was the reaction from her own blood. When the news reached her elderly mother in Philadelphia, she reportedly asked for the details with a cold, dry detachment, maintaining the legendary Kelly stiff upper lip that had driven Grace across the ocean in search of love in the first place. Grace Kelly left behind the legend of the fairy tale princess, but the truth was far more complex and tragic. She was a woman who spent her entire life trying to win the approval of one man, her father, breaking the lives of dozens of others in the process, only to end up trapped in a role that ultimately destroyed her. She gained the title, the castle, and eternal fame, but perhaps in that final second on the mountain road, she was finally free from every role she had ever been forced to play.
The story of Grace Kelly is more than just a chronicle of success. It is one of the most elaborate and expensive deceptions of the 20th century. Today, her name is a brand associated with effortless style, Hermès bags, and silver-haired dignity. But if we strip away the glossy filter, we find a woman who pulled off the most complex deal in the history of show business. Grace achieved something no modern PR agent could replicate. She completely rewrote her own biography, transforming herself from a Hollywood homewrecker into a stainless icon of European royalty. She understood that human memory is short, and that if you give people a beautiful enough fairy tale, they will gladly forget the messy reality of what happened behind the studio curtains. However, looking back from a distance, we can see that this victory was Pyrrhic. Grace Kelly spent her entire life running from the cold shadow of her father, trying to prove she was worthy of the ultimate prize, only to turn herself into a cold, untouchable monument. She sought love from married men because she subconsciously chose those who could never fully belong to her, mirroring the way her father's heart was always out of reach. And when she finally secured the status of being the only one in her principality, she discovered that the title of princess was just another role, except this time there were no weekends off and no one to shout "cut." Her life became a perpetual performance where sincerity was sacrificed at the altar of state interest and family legacy. Today, Monaco thrives, largely due to the momentum Grace gave that tiny sliver of land. But at what cost? We see her daughters and granddaughters still living in the crosshairs of the paparazzi, making their own mistakes while trying to balance personal happiness with centuries-old traditions. Grace's shadow still haunts the Grimaldi Palace, a constant reminder that every diamond in a crown is paid for with a piece of one's soul. She became an icon, and icons, by definition, are not allowed weaknesses, mistakes, or human passions. She locked her true nature in the palace basement, which is perhaps why her eyes in later photographs look so piercingly sad. Who was she, really? A calculating woman who switched roles just in time to save her reputation, or a confused girl lost in the labyrinth of her own insecurities? Most likely, she was both. Grace Kelly proved that you can fool the entire world with white gloves and pearls, but you can never fool yourself. Her tragedy was that she played her leading role too well, and the world never wanted to see the woman behind the mask. In the end, she remains a legend, but legends cannot love. They can only shine with a cold, reflected light, reminding us that even the most beautiful fairy tale has a dark side that no one dares to speak of out loud.